Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar on this new program, the NCI Global Oncology Mentored Research Program. I know I have a few NIH colleagues that have joined, but more importantly, my colleague Margarita Correa Mendez speaks Spanish. So we hope that if there's any Spanish question or something like that that she might want to translate, please feel free to ask in Spanish. She's here to help at least translate that. I think best for us to keep this informal. So this is a pre-application webinar. We keep it informal. I think the more we interact, the better we can answer your questions in real time. So as we go through the slides, please feel free to raise your hand or just interject and ask a question. Margarita, should you see any hand up, please let me know to pay attention to that. So just quickly to give you just an overview of what we are going to do today, we are going to go through the entire funding opportunity announcement through the purpose and scope, eligibility, budget considerations, key elements of the application, review considerations, and the timeline that we are working against. Just a little bit of a background. I think anybody joining this will be aware that cancer is a big problem, and particularly in low and middle income countries. And when you look at the projections from WHO and others who look at this very keenly, really, the numbers are going to increase. They are already high now, but they're going to increase in the several next decades in a way that I think if we don't do something about it, it will be a major problem. As we all know, really research will provide us the answers that we need. And I think if we accept that LMICs are going to bear the burden, then accelerating the capacity to do research in LMICs is really important, particularly thinking about generating knowledge that is specific to the countries or the regions that we are talking about. If you want to make sure that you generate appropriate context-specific knowledge, who best to involve than the LMIC investigators themselves, those who are based in country and know the local context, the local needs and opportunities therewith that they have in their own settings. I think it is important for funders, for mentors, and for everybody else to really be intentional about our efforts to improve the capacity of these investigators to be able to lead and collaboratively work across their regions to really lead the generation of that evidence that we all desire. So the notice here, as you can see up there, really is a supplemental funding opportunity to support mentored research for the early career investigators who come from and work in LMIC regions. Again, you can, through that link, you can find this funding opportunity, and everything that we are going to be talking about today is really lifted from that opportunity. So please feel free to ask questions as we go through. So as a supplemental funding opportunity, that means that really the NCI investigators who have active NCI grants or cooperative agreements are going to be the ones applying. They're applying to recruit and mentor early stage LMIC investigators. So the focus is on the LMIC investigator, but the LMIC investigator cannot apply directly by themselves. They need to find a mentor or a principal investigator who has a grant that is funded through NCI. These funds, again, like I said, are aimed at supporting intensive mentored research and career development. So it's both the research piece of it, but really intent on ensuring that the LMIC investigators can become independent in the conduct of their own research. The overarching goal, like I said before, is to really make sure that the LMIC investigators are leading the efforts to do the kind of research that would generate the kind of data that is specific to their own environments and to the cancer problem in their own areas where they are working. So in terms of what the program requires, so you have, like I said before, we've set this as both for research mentoring, but as well as career development. The intent is to get these early career investigators to be independent researchers who are able to initiate their own work or collaboratively work with others to lead their own research. We have two components, therefore, when you think about this, that I think are important towards making sure that somebody is an independent researcher. And one of that is, for sure, gaining experience conducting high quality research with increasing independence. So those of you who are seasoned researcher, you know how important it is for somebody to be mentored and be allowed to grow wings to fly by themselves. It takes time, but really getting a steady hand to help you doing so would be important. I think often when we emphasize research mentorship, people focus only on the research piece, how to gain the technical skills, how to do this experiment, think about this question and all that. But we also realize, and seasoned mentors or researchers who are joining us here today would know that it takes beyond just the technical skills to be a good scientist or to be independent. So we are calling all these other skills that are not really the technical skills for conducting the research, the professional competencies, often sometimes referred to as soft skills. So how do we engage with these early career investigators to develop these soft skills? How would they learn how to really write a grant, for example? How would they learn to establish collaborations? How do they communicate their science to people who are both sometimes are scientists, but sometimes are not scientists, like when they're talking to ministries of health and things like that? All this goes into molding somebody to really be independent and impactful with the work that we are doing. We, as NCI, we support research, so we want all the training to be done under the context of a research project. And therefore, part of this call asks that for the applicant, they have to have a discrete supplemental project that they'll be working on. So say the mentor decides to recruit an early career investigator. We expect that in your application, you'll have a very good distinct project that will be targeted and tailored for the local context where the investigator works, and that project will be the channel through which you are mentoring the early career investigator. It is important to us that proposal be designed such that the knowledge generated from that work is really specific to the local settings and to the local context. I'll just slow down. If again, like I said, if somebody has any question, please feel free to raise that. As you are considering the research project, as we all know, and I stated before, this is a supplement, and therefore one of the things that is important to do is to make sure that whatever aims you're proposing for the supplemental research project ought to be within the scope of the parent grant. It ought to kind of maybe contribute towards it. You might decide to expand it in ways that are still within your original specific aims. But for me, importantly, is as you're thinking about all this, make sure that it is relevant to the local context. So some special considerations that I think we wanted to mention here. This is a new opportunity. I think often how mentoring has happened is we hope, and many investigators have done this out of the goodness of their hearts. They've just gone ahead and mentored researchers, but we've never dedicated specific resources towards that. We are trying to do so in this program. Again, resources are limited, but at least we are making an effort to ensure that the mentor or the principal investigator who is mentoring the LMIC investigator their time gets recognized by the institution. On the other hand, we are providing funds so that you can actually purpose to have a discrete project that can be funded through the program so that the LMIC investigator gets to do the work. So we expect that the mentors must be able to commit towards providing supervision and mentoring, both for the project and also the career development of the LMIC investigator. As you are thinking about designing that research, I think it's important to engage with the candidate, the LMIC candidate, to really bring, as you're mentoring them towards how you're writing the application and you're thinking about it, how you're coming up with the research questions. I think engaging them and making sure that that research is relevant to their local setting, I think would be important. Particularly important to engage them on their mentoring plan, on the mentoring plan that you're going to both work together on. It is important that you know where the early career investigator is in their career trajectory and how much they need, and therefore tailor your mentoring plan towards benefiting them. I will also say it is important for you to remember that the intent of this application is that most of the training happen at the local institution where the LMIC investigator works. So the idea there is that we want you to train or to mentor the LMIC investigator in a context that after this training, they really can continue doing the work in the settings within there. It is, while it might be important for the LMIC investigator to say travel to a high income country or an institution where there are certain technical skills that they might learn, I think it is important for us to ensure that those technical skills that they learn can be used and are applicable in their own local settings. We appreciate that there are certain cases where, for example, you want to analyze certain types of genomic data and you don't have capacity to do so locally. That would be allowed for time to do something like that, right? But I think if you go at it knowing that the kind of knowledge these investigators are acquiring is supposed to help them locally, you'll be able to weigh how much to balance their time out of their own institutions as they attend these other trainings and the need to actually be able to continue these projects while they're doing it. I think towards the investigator, while you're putting a lot of effort into this kind of mentoring, I think an opportunity here for you is to perhaps think about extending your own work. If you're interested in a certain region and you'd want to work in that region, I think you might think of this as an opportunity for you to explore this new area or this new area of research you want to do within that region. We allow in the budget, like you will see later, travel, and we actually encourage travel for the investigator, the mentor, to go, one, to learn about the environment in which the LMIC investigator is working, right? It's not, sometimes if you are there on the ground, and we are not talking 2 days flying in and just coming out, really the idea here is for you to appreciate the environment under which your investigators are working so that you know and you can understand. If, for example, you go to a location and realize that 2 weeks out of the month, the LMIC investigator doesn't have power in the institution, that will help you think about how you plan your communication. How do you plan what kind of research you can do in that kind of setting in a way that is useful to them and is developing them. I think that, like I said before, as you are considering any kind of work that the investigator might have to learn outside of his context, any kind of skill, or sometimes it's just to say, I have a paper I want to write. This LMIC investigator is a clinical practitioner who also does clinical, right? So I just want to remove him and give him some time to be able to dedicate maybe 2 months into writing. That can be a reason for you to move the investigator out of their regular day-to-day so that he can have that kind of time to be able to write the grant. So we are asking you to be creative here. We are asking you to see how this works. And like I said, for the investigator themselves, perhaps this is an opportunity for you to really learn the environment where you are conducting your research and how you can actually think about your future endeavors in the same area. Importantly, for us to do this effectively, we are allowing that you might, if you don't already have a foreign component to your grant that includes the LMIC country that you're working in. So for example, if say somebody wants to work in Malawi and their grant already has Malawi as a foreign component, that person doesn't have to do anything else but just apply for this funding opportunity. However, if your original research was in Malawi and now you want to add somebody from South Africa, for example, you will need to add South Africa as a foreign component to your grant or cooperative agreement. To do so, you just need to get in touch with the grants management person that is listed on your notice of award. You can CC me on that email, but get onto them and request for a prior approval. Addition of a foreign component to a grant that does not have a foreign component already requires that we approve that administratively from our end. So please get in touch and get in touch early. I think it requires you to do so within 30 days or so of the application deadline. Eligibility, like I said, these are supplements. So the actual applicant is the principal investigator who wishes to mentor an early career investigator on the active grant that they're already holding. I've listed several grant mechanisms here that we allow, but remember the focus is on training and mentoring the LMIC investigator. So the any LMIC investigator here who is interested in this opportunity need to connect with and get in touch with an NCI funded investigator whose grant is active as we talk under any of these mechanisms, and those mentors will know, and therefore you can work with them for them to submit the application that includes you as a mentee that they will mentor. It is not necessary that the principal investigator becomes the mentor as well, right? There are cases where the principal investigator actually will be the mentor, but there are cases where the principal investigator might appoint another person to be the primary mentor of the LMIC investigator. As a matter of fact, I encourage that, or we as NCI encourage the idea of really engaging early career mentors in your own institution or in your own grant. If you get people who are interested and maybe just want to get off on the ground and want to get experience working with LMIC and within LMICs and all that, I think this would be a good opportunity for you, the principal investigator who is applying, to appoint another person in your group to mentor the LMIC investigator. Of course, if that mentor doesn't have sufficient experience, you can work with them and you can help mentor the mentor in mentoring the mentee. I think I'm probably using too many confusing words there. But the idea here is that we are flexible in a way that the PI, being very busy and getting committed with other things, can use this to their advantage by appointing somebody else to do the mentoring, and or allow somebody else in their group to really gain the mentoring experience by mentoring the LMIC investigators. In that case, therefore, I think it will be the primary mentor, right? Whether that primary mentor is the actual principal investigator or that primary mentor is another person assigned by the principal investigator, is that person that we really think will have this ongoing day-to-day kind of interaction with the mentee. We expect, like I said before, for the mentor to be able to travel to the local setting to learn about the context under which the LMIC investigator is working. So in this case, again, because funds are limited, you have the freedom to budget the way you see fit, but for sure, the primary investigator needs to be in the know of what is happening in the local ground. All right. I think I've covered majority of that. Oh, another aspect is, say somebody has never worked in an LMIC before, and you want to get to mentor people in LMIC, and maybe as a principal investigator, this is your opportunity to start exploring working in LMIC. We allow that, you can do so, but then because we also require that you demonstrate experience, experience mentoring, but two, experience working in those LMIC settings, it might be important for you to have more than one mentor in your team. So say, for example, you want to work in Namibia and you've never actually worked in Namibia before, or Africa, let alone Namibia, you might co-opt another mentor into your team that has very good grounding in working in Namibia in a way that would be helpful and additive towards that cumulative experience. So when we look at the experience, we will look beyond just the experience of the principal investigator or the primary mentor. It is important, though, that the primary mentor has expertise, research expertise in the area that is proposed for the supplemental project. Towards the early career investigator, so we are using the term early stage LMIC investigator. Essentially, I am seeing those as people who just, so as listed here, it could be a researcher, it could be a clinician scientist who has to be a citizen or a permanent resident of an eligible LMICs. So low and middle income countries, I think we've excluded the upper middle income countries that are part of the G20, but most of these low and middle income, which includes both upper middle income and lower middle income, the LMIC investigator needs to be a citizen or a permanent resident of that region. They need to hold a doctoral degree or its equivalent. And as we all realize, most LMICs, actually a bachelor's of medicine, for example, is considered the highest degree. And we will allow that even though they might not have a doctoral degree. Importantly, because we are trying to train people to work within the institutions that they are, to continue their research within the institutions that they are, we require that that investigator, LMIC investigator, be an employee of the institution, of the local institution, local LMIC institution. They could be, for example, a lecturer, an instructor, an assistant professor. So we are a little bit flexible. What we realize with LMICs, for example, is it takes quite a bit of time for somebody to really get to do research. So we didn't put a time limit like 5 years after PhD or 10 years after PhD. I think it will depend on the applicant to really prove to us why they are considering an individual an early stage investigator. So we are leaving that open. We are allowing you to be creative about that, with realizing that sometimes it takes a very long time for somebody to bed in as an investigator in this area. Again, in considering their stage of their career stage, we think that those people who have previously received funding from NIH, NCI, or any other NIH institute as a principal investigator, for example, that those will not be considered early stage for the purposes of this funding opportunity. Like I said, for the budget, again, our budgets, this is a supplement for 1 year. So the budget is limited to that 1 year. We have up to 125,000 in total costs. So any costs you're putting there should include both direct and indirect costs. For the LMIC investigator, the mentee, there are certain costs that are allowed. So these are just examples of things that you can include. We give you flexibility to decide what is useful within this limited kind of resources. How much can you utilize it to get to what kind of mileage towards really ensuring that the LMIC investigator is well mentored. So we allow, for example, some salary and fringe benefits for the LMIC investigator for them to be able to dedicate that time towards this kind of training. We allow them to travel to conferences and or other travel that are important towards achieving their objectives. And we put in some funds here, limited funds towards a requested equipment. For example, if somebody needs a computer or something like that to enable them to work, I think we've allowed that. And like I said, importantly, again, because it's a supplement, we will allow some funds to be used towards the actual supplemental research that is proposed in your application. For the mentors, again, in the spirit of recognizing this important effort that they're putting in, we are hoping that you can budget in a way that maybe you do important things, some activities that you propose to do, including traveling to the LMIC institution to be able to learn the environment that they're working in. Again, this is very small monies. We will allow some small monies towards salaries or fringe benefits. But again, I think you will all understand that is not a lot of money. So be judicious about how you go about that. Overall, I would like to say is for you to decide how to budget the funds. The reviewers will, consider whether the budget fits what you've proposed. Programmatically, we'll consider whether it makes sense for the budgets that you propose. So it is important that you justify everything that you put in, right? So it will be odd in a case where majority of the funds are spent, say, on the salaries of the PI, but not the project or the LMIC investigator themselves. I think that would beat the purpose. And I expect that probably that is not going to happen for people who have done this previously without this kind of recognition. So some of the key elements, I just wanted to quickly go over this. Again, there will be a research project, right, that you'll be proposing, again, scientifically, what are the specific aims and all that. But it's important for you to give a brief summary of the parent award under which you're applying. Remember that research needs to be within the scope of the parent award. So just a quick sentence about that and how they connect, I think might be useful and might meet that requirement. But importantly, I think when you're proposing that project, I can't emphasize this enough, the idea that it needs to be relevant to the local context. I know that sometimes relevance is not direct, and that is acceptable, but you must make sure that whatever it is you're doing, really, the LMIC investigator, without you, would have still done that kind of work in their local setting. Again, this is a mentoring kind of program. So we want to emphasize on the research mentoring plan. I think it is important to be very specific on the role that the primary or the co-mentors that you've included will be doing towards mentoring the LMIC investigator. And to me, I think part of that would include really us seeing that the LMIC investigator is really bedded and is intellectually contributing to your own research, right? That we can see that this is not just a thing, right? They're really embedded, that this is important to you as a mentor, to you as an investigator, to have this person, not just because you're helping that person, but because it is also important to you. And to see that, we would expect to see how much they're involved. Are they attending your own journal clubs? For example, if you have those in your institutions, how are you thinking about peer mentoring? We really emphasize peer mentoring because I think it is really important. As you all know, most of the times the best learning happens when peer-to-peer, they speak to each other and they have new ways of thinking. Sometimes as a mentor may be removed from the stage where they are. So them crying to each other and talking to each other, I think there's a lot of learning and maybe bedding even the potential for establishing future collaborations better than, say, the PI and the mentee. There's sometimes a gap there that brings The gap might not be easily filled because of the respect and whatever that is in there that you can't easily break. So we really encourage the mentors or the PI to really think about how do you really, if you really want to make sure that this LMIC investigator succeed, how do you really go about that? Again, I said it wasn't just about mentoring for research. It's great. We want them to be good scientists, and to do so, I think you have to think very carefully on their career development plan. What are the kind of things you've put in that are consistent with the goals that they've laid out themselves as what will advance them in their own career and set them up for this career independence that we're asking for. As you are considering your applications, I think to add to these points is that we will require, and the documents that will be reviewed, for example, will be the primary mentor statement. I think in that statement is where you'll demonstrate your experience, expertise, and commitment to supervise and to mentor these mentees. I think it is important in that primary mentor statement for it to come out clearly that you are vouching for the qualifications and the potential of the LMIC investigator to really grow and advance their careers as this program wishes. We would expect a personal statement from the ESL, from the early career LMIC investigator themselves. That statement is coming from them, and they need to articulate what their career goals are, because those are the career goals that you'll be using in designing your research, your mentoring plan to make sure that you capture their own interests. So you can see why it is important as you are applying to actually be or have already identified the candidate, so that you are doing this together and you are helping them write their own personal statements, but they are also helping you write the application by making sure that there's a very clear alignment of their goals and whatever you're proposing that you'll mentor them on, and that you are all in agreement that that mentoring plan is good for them. We expect, again, a letter from the LMIC institution itself vouching for that LMIC investigator, but importantly, just showing that the institution is supporting and is hoping to support this early career investigator to establish themselves in that institution, to provide the kind of environment that is needed for somebody to actually really conduct research. So again, in line with that, what will the reviewers be looking for when your applications come in? On the LMIC investigator, they will be looking to see whether the early career investigator has the potential and demonstrates commitment to develop into an early career investigator. It's important that you look at this, because everybody hearing an opportunity would want to jump on, but only so many have gotten to a level where they demonstrate that, right? If somebody is too busy just wanting to do clinical research, perhaps that is not clinical research, but wanting to do clinical practice, perhaps that is not where to invest majority of your time into making them a scientist, if that is not their primary goal. Is the early career investigator showing sufficient prior academic and clinical, if relevant, right, experience that then warrants this kind of award? For the primary mentor and co-mentors, again, is about qualifications that you can actually do what you say you're doing. You can mentor the research, you can help them develop their careers. You have to show that you've actually helped others develop their careers. You have to show your expertise. And again, like I said, all this does not have to be done by one person. If you know that you're lacking, for example, in an expertise or experience in a certain area, you can co-opt another mentor into your team to cover for that experience. So finally, again, no, not finally, but as part of the review, again, we will look at the research plan. Like I said, does it meet and does it, is it important to the local context? Is the research plan relevant to the career objectives? So I want to explain this a little bit. To me, the science is important. And I don't think that anybody is going to propose a science that is so irrelevant and out of here and is not helpful at all. But I want to say that the emphasis is actually on mentoring the LMIC investigator. So the more activities you do towards mentoring, just using the research piece as a platform. So I am not looking, for example, to see, the outcomes. Have they published how many papers through a small grant or something like that? Or no, I'm seeing to see, have you, during training them, made them realize that publication is important? Are they writing something or that applying for grants is important? Did you co-opt them into learning how to write grants and things like that? So really, the research helps bed them, because that is what they're applying and training to do, but we need to build them up and make them better for that position. One of the major components will be that mentoring and career development plan. Like I said, make sure that whatever you put in there can clearly demonstrate a path towards developing the LMIC investigator to becoming an independent researcher. Make sure that you have ways to check it, ways to evaluate, you must include that. How do you communicate across continents, and how often are you doing that, and what do you need to make sure that somebody sitting from somewhere that is not part of your team can really look and say, this person is really getting as much as they can get from this arrangement. We will look also at the environment and institutional commitment. Like I said, there are two institutions here. One is a sponsoring institution. I think the sponsoring institution has to demonstrate that they will provide the PI or the mentors sufficient time so that they can devote their time towards mentoring, that they will recognize that this is an important activity that the mentors, and that activity can contribute to the PI or mentor's own career growth and own development or promotions or whatever else that counts towards whatever. So getting a very strong letter from your institution supporting that, I think, would be important. Importantly, again, environment that the institution provides, the sponsoring institution, in this case, the institution where the mentor or the PI is coming from. What kind of environment are they planning? What kind of activities? I talked about peer mentoring. What kind of arrangements are they making to make sure that the peer mentoring is working, that they connect these LMIC investigators with the people working on their research grants and all that. I said simple things like attending journal clubs or things like that, or tumor boards, whatever it is that you guys are involved in, could be an important way of showing that. From the LMIC institution, again, the same thing. The institution has to show commitment to the LMIC investigator. And to us, one, of course, the primary commitment is that these people are already employed, and that these people have been allowed to do the research and are provided the kind of support. They have a laboratory to do the research to begin with. So those kind of things, I think, go towards really showing that the institution, local institution itself, is investing in the success of their own students. So just my last slide here is to show you just the general timeline. The due date for these applications will be May 17th, 2022. We hope to conduct the review. So the review is an administrative review, will be done by program officers at NCI, and they will score depending on certain criteria, and we will fund those who show merit, and we will fund as many as our funds allow. So I think it's important that you make sure that your application is competitive so that you can effectively compete. Again, we hope to probably announce funding sometimes, maybe in August or September, and that, like I said before, the project will be 1-year project, probably starting date of, say, September 30th for now. But again, those are tentative dates as we are planning backwards from that time. So with that, I think we can go into questions and answers. I just wanted to put this up here for somebody who wants to reach me. You can reach me directly through my email as stated up there. So let me stop the sharing so that I can see people's faces. Maria, I see your hands up.
Yes, James, I'm speak in Spanish. ¿Cómo será medida o evaluada el potencial que tenga el candidato de ser realmente una persona independiente y que vaya a aprovechar muy bien la propuesta y los fondos de financiamiento?
James, the question is, how would a potential candidate be evaluated or measured in terms of how they would be individually to better use the resources and the grants that, or the resources that are being assigned? So again, to add my question, sorry about this. Yeah. It is the question that Maria Cecilia is asking is specifically how the potential of a candidate will be evaluated in terms of
right. Yeah. Right, like, so let me maybe just back up a little bit and say that, so the candidate has, I hope, realizes that the actual applicant, the person who will be submitting the application is the principal investigator or mentor that has the NIH grant. And that this mentor, the applicant, needs to connect, the LMIC investigator needs to connect with that mentor to organize the application and work through that. So for the candidate, they will look at your personal statement. So one of the requirements says that you will write your personal statement stating your experiences in research, your interests, and also showing what you've done before and what your career goals are moving forward. So I think it's very important that you strengthen that piece to make sure that when we read that, we can believe that you are really committed to wanting to becoming an independent researcher, and there's evidence that you're showing us that demonstrates that commitment.
Okay, let me translate here. María Cecilia, la respuesta es, y si quieres seguir la pregunta también, que depende mucho de la carta de intención que escribes. Y ahí es donde clarificas cuáles son tus intereses, qué has hecho, cuál es tu plan. Y basándose en eso es donde evalúan si tus cualidades como para ser investigador independiente y aprovechar los recursos de la financiación.
Listo, muchas gracias. Otra pregunta que tengo es si es un requisito ser empleado de la institución donde trabajo directamente. ¿Sí? Yes. El ejemplo es porque soy investigadora de un grupo de la Universidad de Antioquia, pero no tengo un contrato permanente con la universidad, digámoslo en esos términos.
Okay, James, she's asking if the requirement, a little bit of clarification about the requirement of being an employee of the institution. So she is part of an investigation group at the University of Antioquia in Colombia, but she doesn't have an actual contract with the institution at this point. So is there like a possibility that maybe because she is, for instance, as a postdoctoral fellow in the institution, is this something that could be adjusted?
Yeah, you know, I understand where she's coming from. So one of the reasons we put that requirement in was just part to the need to show that the institution is committed to that investigator, and therefore that investigator really has an opportunity to work within that environment to succeed. So that was the reason we put that requirement in. I think that if there's really an opportunity like this and that the training team wanted that to be on board, I find it difficult to believe that they can't have some kind of contract with that institution, particularly if the institution knows that their salary will be paid for during that time that they're training. I don't know, but yeah, best for me would be if there was a clear indication, because that would be a show of commitment of the institution towards investing in this individual. I often find it hard that when somebody's, I know that sometimes you need this kind of experience to get a job to begin with, but I also know that if you are really not embedded in an institution, if you don't have a job already, it's very difficult to translate this kind of activity into some kind of sustainable plan. So I know this might cut off some people, but I think it's an important consideration. So I don't know whether I'm answering a question directly, but yeah. Unfortunately, there will have to be a connection or a connection of the commitment of that institution towards their own development. And to us, that means that they should be at least employee or under some kind of contract with that institution.
María Cecilia, él dice que sí es importante que haya un compromiso de la institución en que hay posiblemente un contrato o interés de un contrato a futuro. Entonces, si quieres clarificar más al respecto, podemos hablar después también.
Listo, muchas gracias. La última pregunta. En cuanto a la propuesta como tal del proyecto de investigación que se desarrollará, pues no ese cuánto tiene un peso en la evaluación y cómo sería esa evaluación en cuanto a la propuesta, digamos, científica como tal para llevar a cabo en el sitio.
Okay, she's asking about the weight that the scientific proposal might have on the full application. So in addition to, the mentoring part, she says like the emphasis that should be made on the science part of the application process or the whole package versus
Yes.
like what's the weight that it has?
I've not weighted them yet, but I would emphasize, like I said before, that I think it is the mentoring and career development plan that would really be key in terms of the review, right? But I think for you to really develop a very good mentoring and career development plan for a researcher, it goes without saying that the science itself that you're proposing has to be sound, right? It can't just be something. So I don't know that I'll separate and say this has more weight than the other, but it's together. I think we will be able to make a determination that yes, the people proposing a science, because remember we are saying the mentor has to have expertise in the research area they are proposing, right? So that needs to come through as they are writing the actual research project. But importantly is to make them be able to do that very exciting research project that they proposed is how then they are going to be mentored as they do so. I don't know whether that...
Yeah, so María Cecilia, lo que está diciendo es que es en conjunto, es el plan, la propuesta científica que estás haciendo, pero también es importante que en el paquete completo vaya cómo va a ser el proceso de mentoría y el plan de desarrollo profesional, que es importante tener eso junto y que no, hasta el momento no le ha dado como un peso al uno o al otro, pero sí es importante que todo vaya como un paquete y que sea cohesivo.
Yeah, I see Edric and then Sabashmuke and then Musliu.
Thank you for the highlighting presentation. I'm a young researcher from Tanzania. My question is, should the proposed project for the young researcher be specifically entailed with ongoing projects that is done by the mentor?
It needs to be within the scope of the research project that is done by the mentor. And, we are kind of fluid on that. In other words, somebody can't propose to, if somebody is working on, say, cervical cancer and an element, say, of implementation science in the cervical, if somebody proposes to do something around cervical cancer with implementation science, while implementation science piece or some testing a strategy or something like that was not involved in their parent grant, you can see that there's a connection to the parent grant because they're still within the primary aims of looking at the cervical cancer, whatever. So it needs to be within the primary aim, but often, you know, the link doesn't necessarily have to be, because the investigator himself has to show us why we are giving them this extra money to do a thing. So it has to have a different thing that they're bringing and they're adding into the overall research without being outside of scope. So I don't know whether that captures you. Sabushmike?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Daniel from Rwanda. I would like to ask about how can someone get a mentor who has won NCI grant award? The second question, is it a road to work in team during the time of application? I mean, can some people make a team so that they may apply, make the application in a team? Thank you.
So really, we don't have, so far we don't have like a matching program where we say, oh, we are matching applicants with, say, mentors. Maybe in the future, if this opportunity comes in the future, we'll think about creating events where potential mentees can meet up with potential mentors and all that. But towards who, like I said, who applies is the principal investigator who is on that NIH active grant. So while we expect that the mentee will be working with the PI towards making this particular application because it is about the LMIC investigator, it is still important that the PI who is submitting the application be involved in the entirety of that process. So you can include other people, other players in the team, but I think it's important for the PI to really be in the know, such that even if they assign somebody else to be the primary mentor, they are in the know and they've okayed that as an activity that they want to happen. So, Muslim?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Muslim from Nigeria. Just a short one. I mean, one of the exclusions you gave regarding the ESLI investigator was with regards to not receiving a previous grant. By that, do you mean an NCI/NIH grant or any form of grant at all?
NCI/NIH grant for now, because those are the ones we can be in control of. But if you say received an equivalent of an NIH, say R01 from Wellcome Trust, and that shows up on your application, which you will be putting that as part of your experience, that you can see how somebody can evaluate that and say, perhaps you don't meet that criteria of an early stage career investigator. So I guess it depends. We will look at your application as a total package, including the kind of experiences that you state to determine whether we consider you early career or not. So that is why I didn't set as an age specifically, because sometimes I think that is not relevant, but we'll be looking at the entire package to decide so.
Okay, then the second question is on the research project itself. Is there a particular format or page count perhaps to engage the NCI established investigator with regards to that?
Yes, I think for the entire package, I think is about 6 pages, but remember it will contain the research project itself. It's got the mentoring plan as well. So again, I know how we usually go at this is people overemphasize the science itself, and rightly so, because we want good science to be done, right? And we are NCI, we are supporting good science. What I am hoping with this program is that people will overemphasize the mentoring piece. Yes, the research still has to be sound, but overemphasize the mentoring piece. I want to see a very strong mentoring plan showing really how that mentoring can lead to your own success. The only reason we are adding the research piece here or the supplemental project is because we are actually mentoring you to be a scientist, to be able to do independent research. How best to do that other than linking you to doing an actual research opportunity. So I'm not expecting this, they're very small monies here, right? I'm not expecting a very elaborate research project. I don't think somebody will score you higher because you have a very elaborate research project. I think I will be looking at, okay, this research project is sound, right? Is the aims are thought well and whatever, and maybe there are 1 or 2 aims that you're going to do. I'll be looking at what are the things then that is being done around it to make you an independent investigator. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Lily?
Oh, so just going back, I have a question with respect, again, to the sort of ESLI eligibility, just to kind of clarify, because we are interested in mentoring someone who isn't an LMIC, but she has been, out practicing for over 10 years, has a leadership role in the Cancer Center, but in terms of her research career stage, she would be considered, more of an early stage. She doesn't have many publications, but is very interested in research, and we're trying to help mentor her. So, and it sounds like, there was no age cutoff deliberately for that purpose, but how would we help shape that application to make sure that that is reflected appropriately if we're able to help her, if she's eligible, I suppose?
I think maybe this is perhaps more a question for you, right? That would you consider that if somebody has, say, worked in the Ministry of Health, say they finished their PhD 10 years ago, right? And they ended up working at the Ministry of Health for another 10 years or so, would you consider that, would that be the person you want to invest your time in terms of building a future career path, right? Or career objective for whatever you're doing. So I think it's a call for you to make, because I think reviewers will be looking at that and saying, if I had this kind of funds, would this be the person I'm spending my monies on? So somebody can be in the late stages of their own other careers. I think I would be like, oh, maybe I want to invest this money on perhaps a younger generation or something like that. But I can't make that call here. Like I said, we are looking at this as a package. And so depending on what you write and the case you make to convince that these people are an early career stage, a university vice chancellor, for example, might not have done research at all and now wants to do research, right? Would that be the person I want to invest my money on as an early career investigator? I think I would say no, because while they are young in their careers, I think it's difficult for me to make a case that they're also young in terms of a longer term future, whatever. So I don't know, it's going to be reviewers to make that call, and therefore it's important for you to coach it well in a way that you convince people and you convince yourself that that person you're putting forth works for you to do so. So we are on top of the hour here. So I think that, again, we are available. The applications are due on May 17th. You can reach out to any of us. If any PI is online, you can reach out to the parent program director who can also connect with us. But I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Margarita, for helping to translate. And I wish you all the best. Again, like I said, the majority of this will depend on you, the PI, making the call on how best to really help us advance our objective of building capacity for early career investigators who are based and doing their work in the low and middle income countries. Thank you very much, and we look forward to receiving applications from you or hearing from you.
U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, cancer.gov/global health, 1-800-4-CANCER, produced April 2022.